Hi, I'm Mr. Wahlberg, and I'm glad you're here. I often think about the future of history, and as a history teacher, I'm often considering what are historians in some unknown future time going to think when they look back at our present time, and what is our present going to look like to history of the future. For instance, some future historian might be, looking at this very video and wondering, why is Mr. Wahlberg all wearing like a baby blue outfit, that his jacket and his shirt and his tie are all kind of in this light blue color? And, we moderns, we understand that. The people that are part of my classroom today when I'm recording this, they know exactly why I would be wearing this all baby blue outfit. But there's going to be some unknown point in the future where they might want to go restudy this moment, and they're going to say, well, okay, what's the context that Mr. Wahlberg's living in at the time? Like, specifically, what's the year? What's the date? And can it be found? What can we put this video in the context of what's going on in the greater picture of the school in which he teaches? Or is he going to, does this fit into a movie? Does this, the trendy thing? Is everybody wearing baby blue coats in that era? Things that we know are going to be mysteries sometime in the future, and then they're going to have to go and reanalyze the historical record to go draw their conclusions from it. Now, of course, like I said, we moderns, we know that the reason I'm dressed in all blue, jacket and shirt and tie, and actually even, blue pants along the way, we know that the answer is because we have 4 objectives today. By the end of class day, you should be able to explain Hitler's territorial expansion and how Great Britain and France responded. You should be able to summarize the first battles of World War II. You should be able to explain the reasons behind Nazi persecution of Jews and the problem facing Jewish residents. You should be able to describe the Nazis' final solution to the Jewish problem and the horrors of the Holocaust. Let's begin in room maneuver number 3. The first moves of World War II happen when Austria and Czechoslovakia fall to the Nazis. And let's talk first with Austria. The country of Austria was created after World War I. It was, you had the dual kingdom of Austria-Hungary, and that gets split up into 2 different parts. There was Austria now and Hungary. And it was broken up into really 7 different countries and territories, but mostly Austria and Hungary. And Austria was a fairly small country south of Germany, and the majority of Austrians were ethnically German. They thought of themselves as German. They spoke German language, they ate German-style food, and they favored unification with Germany, just like we should just be part of Germany to go along the way. And on March 12th, 1938, German troops marched into Austria, and they really marched into Austria unopposed. And Germany goes and seizes the country of Austria. And the next day, Germany pronounced that its union was complete and that Austria had become part of Germany, and that Germany had picked up all these people that thought of themselves as German anyway. The United States and the rest of the world did nothing to stop Germany. While it was a violation of the Treaty of Versailles, it looked like actually this kind of makes sense, right? I mean, it's almost like the spirit of the Treaty of Versailles, that these are, ethnic boundaries and the nation should be folded in with the state. And so the world basically did nothing to stop Germany because it seemed like a logical, if, undesirable, but still logical move. So point B. Here I'm going to talk about the Sudetenland. And the Sudetenland is a mountainous region on the border between Germany and Czechoslovakia. And it had about 3 million speakers of German, so German language speakers there. And Hitler wanted to go annex that country for what he referred to as the Lebensraum. Lebensraum is a German word. It means living room. And basically it's the idea that Germany should take over the parts that feel like Germany and involve German people on, and they should be able to live in that area. That's their living room, it's their Lebensraum, and they should be able to go seize it. And they should be able to take it also for its resources. Hitler claimed that the Czechs, the people of Czechoslovakia, were abusing the Germans of the Sudetenland, basically saying they're mistreating them because they're not Czech, they're German, and they're get kicked around as second-class citizens. And so those people really do belong to Germany, and then so the Sudetenland should be seized from Czechoslovakia and rolled into Germany along the way. And it was kind of a similar thing with Austria. People are like, I don't know, probably not. It's not a really great idea, but I kind of see where you're coming from on that. France and Great Britain, though, they had a promise with Czechoslovakia that they were going to defend it from the Nazis and Nazi invasion along the way. In September of 1938, Hitler held a meeting with the French Prime Minister, Edouard Daladier, and the British Prime Minister, a guy named Neville Chamberlain. And here, Hitler, the Fuhrer, promised that Czechoslovakia would be his last territorial claim. And he says, we all agree these are German people and they should be just folded into Germany. And this is the last thing I'm interested in. We should be able to stop there. And so those 3 sides, Germany and France and Great Britain, signed what's known as the Munich Agreement, which handed the Sudetenland over to Germany without a single shot being fired. And France and Great Britain said, really, they're protecting Czechoslovakia on this one because they're not going to war. They're actually defending that area and just keeping the Sudetenland, and they're going to make that German in the air. Chamberlain pursued this as a policy of appeasement. This is an important word that you're going to want to remember. Appeasement is the idea of giving up a person's principles to go pacify an aggressor. This is handing over the lunch money to the bully because you don't want to get beat up by the bully, right? That's appeasement. But anyway, Chamberlain returns back to Great Britain, and he greeted like a hero as the guy that solved the war. He said, my friends, there has come back from Germany peace with honor. I believe it is peace in our time. And Neville Chamberlain's really excited that this policy of appeasement is going to keep the Great Britain out of the war. Worth definitely remembering that the British had lived through World War I, through the Great War, and they weren't really excited about going back and getting into another one. If there's a way to avoid a war, then Chamberlain looks like the man who's figured out how to do that. On the other hand, Chamberlain doesn't speak for all of Germany, and his political rival is a guy named Winston Churchill. And he's a member of Parliament, so is Chamberlain, the Prime Minister. He's like the head of Parliament. Well, his rival at Parliament, Winston Churchill, condemns the appeasement policy. He says Britain and France had to choose between war and dishonor. They chose dishonor. They're going to have war. Winston Churchill had long been suspicious of Hitler, but other members of Parliament got tired of Hitler, like constantly his saber rattling and always like constant fear mongering about Hitler along the way. The House of Commons approved the policy. At sunrise on March 15th of 1939, German troops poured into whatever remained of Czechoslovakia, and the Nazis just took the whole country, not just the state land, but the whole of Czechoslovakia. Subpoint C. In the spring of 1939, so about the same time they roll over and just take Czechoslovakia, Hitler claimed that there were German-speaking Poles, so people like in Poland, but weren't speaking Polish, they're speaking German, and they were ethnically German. And he starts claiming that these German-speaking Poles were being mistreated by Poland as an ethnic minority along the way. Poland had a military alliance with France and Great Britain along the way. They had been long suspicious of Hitler's Germany, but other countries thought, like, Hitler is bluffing. He's not going to keep saying this over and over again. Invading Poland is obviously going to drag, France into a war. It's not like Czechoslovakia. It's a much stronger tie than Poland. And then, they're going to go to get an attack with the Poles on one side and the French on the other, and Germany's just not going to fight a two-front war. They're just not going to do it. And then, on the other side, like you've got Russia, and Russia is going to go defend Poland along the way. And like this, they're not going to make the same mistake they made during World War I. They're just not going to do it again. Secretly, though, on August 23rd of 1939, Stalin and Hitler surprised the world. They announced they had a non-aggression pact and that Germany and Russia were not going to fight. They were going to attack each other, fascist Germany and now communist Russia. They had been bitter enemies, but this pact meant they had a new relationship between the two countries and were pledging peace along the way. Secretly, there was another pact. And that was a secret pact to say that Poland is toast, and they're going to just divide it in half, and Germany's going to get the one side, Russia's going to go get the other side. And now that there's no competition between them, they're agreed in cahoots. With the danger of a two-front war eliminated, Poland's fate was sealed. 1 week later, Hitler overran Poland in what's known as the Blitzkrieg. Blitzkrieg, German word, means lightning war. First came the Luftwaffe German Air Force. The Luftwaffe, like German word, basically means like air force, right? It's German Air Force. And they would rain bombs on military bases and airfields and railroads and cities. And basically the first step of the Blitzkrieg would go to neutralize the opponent's ability to go fight back. And then meanwhile, tanks race through the countryside along the way. The tanks causing panic and confusion with their destruction, and there's no way to defend against them. That was a short, fast, powerful two-punch attack that surrounded the enemy, continuously changes the battlefront. It's basically impossible to defend against. So think of it like Brazilian soccer. There's no like single opponent that you're going after. And the Blitzkrieg worked perfectly. Germany annexed the western half of the Poland with 2/3 of the population. The Soviet Union went and attacked the eastern edge of the Poland. Before the end of September, Poland ceased to exist and was divided up between the two countries. Great Britain and France declared war on Germany, and World War II had begun. Subpoint E. For several months, Britain and France settled in along what's known as the Maginot Line. The Maginot Line was basically the border between Germany and France, and it was a stationary defenses. France had really looked at what World War I, the Great War, and said all of those trench warfare decisions, like trench warfare sucks, but you know what else it is? It's kind of an effective defensive position because Germany never significantly advanced into France. And so France really puts all of their efforts into this Maginot Line, stationary defenses, not trenches anymore, but like battlements built into the hills and to really make sure that the Germans can't advance onto the French territory. And for several months, the British and the French on one side settled in along the Maginot Line, and the Germans settled along on the other side, and they stared off against each other and gave each other the stink eye in what became known as not the Blitzkrieg, but the Sitzkrieg. It was a sitting war, and both sides just lined up and didn't fight. The Maginot Line, the stationary defender, both sides settled in, but actually never fired a shot. They declared war, but didn't begin shooting at each other. And newspapers referred to it as like, this is a phony war. It's not even a real war. Like, wars shoot at each other, and they're not even doing that. Both sides declared war, but nobody actually started fighting. Meanwhile, Stalin goes, and Stalin is like not involved in the Sitzkrieg, but has that alliance pact with the Nazis, and then Stalin starts picking up territory while Germany and France and Great Britain are occupied with each other. Stalin goes and he picks up the countries of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. In late of 1939, Stalin attacks and captured Finland as well. And then suddenly on April 9th of 1940, Hitler goes and invades Denmark and Norway. On paper, Hitler is saying like, oh yeah, well, I want to make sure that the communists don't come and take over these lands. Also, I want to protect those countries' freedom and protect them independence so they don't get picked up by Stalin and the Soviet Union. Then once he controls them, Hitler also goes and builds naval bases on their coasts to go launch attacks on Great Britain because Germany doesn't really have good access to the sea, but he does once he takes over Denmark and Norway. Then he captures the Netherlands and Belgium and Luxembourg by the end of May, and it looks like Hitler's picking up territory pretty easy, and that brings us to Roman numeral number 4. France and Great Britain are fighting on. So what happens here is that the Germans go and attack into Belgium. And once they take Belgium, the Maginot Line is worthless. Essentially, all of those stationary defenses along the French and German border become unimportant because Germany just like goes up and goes through Belgium and just walks around the stationary defenses. Hitler could march northward around it, and then he sent German tanks to the vast Ardennes forest in the northeast. That allowed Hitler to avoid the British and French troops. They considered the Ardennes forest impassable. It is a very thickly forested area, but there are roads through it, and then you get tanks and airplanes that will just fly over it, and the forest isn't that good of a defense anymore. The British and the French forces retreated back to the beaches of Dunkirk. There they were trapped with their backs against the English Channel. So Dunkirk is a port in France, and it's like across from the English Channel. And basically the Nazis are rolling into France, and the British and the French troops are on their heels, and they are retreating, and they have to like retreat further and further to the sea, get their backs to the sea along the way. And in less than a week, in June of 1940, a makeshift fleet of 800 fishing boats and tugboats and river barges and pleasure yachts and anything that could float and cross the English Channel was sent across to go ferry any kind of troops out and just evacuate France along the way. They ferried 330,000 British and French and Belgian troops safely across the English Channel. It was known as the Miracle of Dunkirk, and it saved basically the entire army, all of the soldiers along the way. They did lose a lot of equipment, and the Nazis went and picked up a lot of the British and the French and the Belgian stuff, but it saved all the soldiers, and I guess that's the important part, right? Later in a month, Italy then invaded France from the south, entering the war on the side of the Nazis. So like the fascists in Italy go and they team up with the Nazis, and the Italians push up through the south and they take southern part of France, and then Germany comes and swoops in through Belgium and takes the northern part of France. Germans were marching towards Paris to go take the capital. On June 22nd, 1940, Hitler handed to French officers the terms of surrender. Germany occupied northern France, which means they took it over and occupied it directly. Like just the northern part of France was Nazi France, and they were just going to run it there. Then in southern France, they set up what's known as a puppet government. And if you imagine like a puppet looking like it's alive and moving itself, but secretly some puppeteer is running the puppet. Think about a government operating that way. Also, southern France looks like it's an independently operating country, but imagine the Nazis are pulling the strings on it. We refer to that as Vichy France, because Vichy, a city in France, becomes the capital of the new southern France, the free France side. It's not really free, it's a puppet government, but that's kind of the way it's going. Vichy was run by French collaborators. The Vichy government was ostensibly an independent country, but it in reality was controlled by the Nazis along the way. The great French general, a guy named Charles de Gaulle, he escaped, and he actually escaped to England, and there he set up a new government. And he's like, he calls this the French government in exile, saying this is the proper government of France. It's just not in France at the time because it's being occupied by an enemy country, but it's like the southern France, the Vichy France, that's not proper France. Our proper French government being run by de Gaulle is being run in Great Britain. It's the government in exile. With the capital city, he says that France has lost a battle, but France has not lost the war. He organized the Free French Forces, which pledged to fight Hitler's occupation. They and a group known as the Maquis were a group of guerrilla fighters from Vichy and led daring attacks against the German occupiers, subpoint B. In summer of 1940, Germany assembled an invasion fleet along the French coast with plans to go invade Great Britain. Germany also planned an air assault because its navy couldn't compete with Great Britain. So Germany is a great military, a great army country, but has kind of a weak navy. Which makes sense because Germany is mostly a landlocked country. Great Britain, on the other hand, is kind of flips the opposite. They have kind of a mediocre army, but a great navy, which again makes sense because it's an island country. And so they plan an invasion fleet along the way, and Germany also plans an air assault, saying they'll fly over and attack, Great Britain from the sky because they can't beat them at the sea. The British are going to win the battles at the sea. And that brings us to what was known as the Battle of Britain, where German planes just bombed British targets. Churchill, by this point, had been elected to prime minister. People lost confidence in Chamberlain along the way, and they began preparing for Germany's impending attack. And the great line of Winston Churchill, I'm going to quote like this long section out of it because it's great. Churchill was such a great rhetorician. He just understood how to use the language. But he writes, or he says, "What General Wagland has called the Battle of France is over. The Battle of Britain is about to begin. Upon this battle depends the survival of Christian civilization. Upon it depends our British life and the long continuity of our institutions and empire. The whole fury and might of the enemy must soon be turned over on us. Hitler knows he will have to break us in this island or lose the war. If we can stand up to him, all Europe may be free, and the life of the world might move forward into broad, sunlit uplands. But if we fail, then the whole world, including the United States, including all we have known and cared for, will sink into the abyss of a new dark age made more sinister and perhaps more protracted by the lights of a perverted science. Let us therefore brace ourselves to the duties and bear ourselves so that if the British Empire and its Commonwealth last for 1,000 years, men will still say, this is their finest hour." Churchill was a great rhetorician. He understood that to go rally and support against long odds mattered, and Churchill was the great voice of the era. By mid-July, Germany, though, was running bombing runs over Great Britain, hoping to gain total control of the island skies by destroying the Royal Air Force, the RAF. The Nazis had 2,600 planes, 2,000 of which were running, all focused on the target of Great Britain. At first, they would target airfields. The Luftwaffe then would go spread out to go target cities. So, the first goal was to go cripple the RAF's ability to go fight back and then go to take down the cities from there. Every night for 2 months in a row, London, the capital and most important city, was just routinely bombed from the sky. At nighttime, just like explosions falling out of the sky, just really terrorizing the people. Britain had, though, a defensive advantage. A newly invented technology known as radar was used to track Nazi aircraft in the darkness, and then they would scramble the Royal Air Force to go shoot down German planes, and basically the Germans kept how do they keep finding us? Because radar was new technology. 6 weeks later, Hitler called it off. He called off the invasion of Great Britain. Basically, just couldn't find a way to go break them. Of the Royal Air Force, Churchill famously said, "Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few." The RAF was able, pretty efficiently defending against the German attack. Roman numeral number 5. Now here we're going to talk about the German Holocaust in this Roman numeral and in the next one. And honestly, I got to be a little bit cautious about this. I'm going to take a sidebar. I don't usually do this in the middle of a video, but I'm going to take a sidebar on this one. The Holocaust is one of those things that as a history teacher, I've taught it in every position along the way. And I got to say, in every way, I feel like I fail as an educator because there is so much of a temptation to indulge, I think is the best way to say it, to indulge in the horrors of the Holocaust. Because to a person who wants to indulge in the horrors, there's plenty there to work with. I've also fallen off the other side of the road and had tried to avoid the terrors of the Holocaust and saying we just don't need to get into the details of it because these were human beings and I don't want to get caught into the indulgence of along the way. And I feel like as a teacher of American history, this is such a huge subject. I need to be fair to it. I need to be honest to it. I don't think I will ever do it justice because the very act is an injustice. So I don't know. This may be a disappointing piece. This may be one of those things that angers students. It may anger future viewers of this video, of the people I don't even know. And I'm sorry. I'm going to do my best. Please do your best. Roman numeral number 5. although the targets of the Jewish people, although the Jewish people weren't the only like targets and victims of the Holocaust, they're certainly the center of the Nazi targets. Eager for a scapegoat for national problems, Germany soon began to believe Hitler's claims that Jews were the cause of the bad economy and that Jews were causing Germany's defeat in the Great War in World War I. The Nazis stripped Jewish people of their citizenship, of their jobs, of their property. They required a bright yellow Star of David to be displayed on their clothing. In November of 9th and 10th of 1938, Nazi stormtroopers significantly attacked Jewish homes and businesses and synagogues. They began smashing windows and destroying property, and the police just let it happen. It's called Kristallnacht. A German word means the night of broken glass, and it was an act of police-caused terrorism to intimidate and go scare Jewish people into submitting to the unbreakable power of the government. But 100 Jewish people that night were killed, and hundreds were injured, and 30,000 were arrested and just wrapped up in sweeping arrests. And the crime was just the guilty of being Jewish, which isn't really a crime, subpoint B. Kristallnacht marked a step up in Jewish harassment and persecution. That year, the Nazis tried to speed up Jewish immigration, just kick them out of the country altogether, but found few countries that would even go take Jews. Jews are always kind of a kicking boy in human history, and it's a super complicated reason why that's a little bit beyond the scope of this video, but anyway, there's a lot of countries wouldn't go take the Jewish refugees. France had already had 40,000 refugees. Great Britain already had 80,000 refugees. Both countries refused to take any more. Both countries feared the turmoil of anti-Semitism, and if you just keep bringing Jews into the country, eventually the people of France and Great Britain are going to go retaliate against too many Jews in their country. And Britain also controlled Palestine. Palestine was part of the broken up mandates from the League of Nations and the Treaty of Versailles. And the United States agreed to go, take 100,000 Jewish refugees. That was a controversial move in the United States as well. Americans feared a strain on the economy. America is also in the Great Depression at the time, and it's just wasn't eager to go absorb 100,000 new people. Maybe they're enemy agents. Maybe these are people in cahoots with the Germans, and the uncertainty just began to spiral out. Anti-Semitism had never really been as common in the United States as it had been in other places, but it was still present, and there was still just a feeling like America just shouldn't be taking on, in particular, Jewish people. Take, for instance, the German ocean liner St. Louis. It had passed into Miami in 1939, and when it did that, of its 943 passengers, 740 of them held U.S. immigration papers and had entitlement to come enter into the United States, permitting them into the country. But the U.S. Coast Guard swept down and basically said, I know you have papers, but we just can't do it right now. And they prevented the passengers from disembarking. And so the St. Louis had to turn around and go back to Europe. Most of its passengers would then go be killed in the Holocaust along the way. It's a sad moment in American immigration history, Roman numeral number 6. Hitler considered how to go deal with the Jews and came up with what he referred to as the final solution, subpoint A. And by 1939, there was only 250,000 Jews left in all of Germany, but Nazi-occupied countries had millions of them. Obsessed with ridding Europe of Jews altogether, Hitler turned to what he referred to as the final solution. The final solution was a policy of genocide. Genocide is the deliberate, systematic killing of an entire population. Just the elimination of a race of people is genocide. Motivated that the Aryans were a master race. Now, Aryanism is not a race. It's a pseudo-scientific race that kind of circulated around the idea. It's the idea of pure Germanness. Nazis condemned to slavery and death anybody that didn't fit that. The Jews and the Gypsies and the Freemasons. And Hitler says the Freemasons supported the Jewish conspiracy to go rule the world. And also religious minorities like the Jehovah's Witness, who, for religious reasons, wouldn't support, the Nazi salute or join the army, or people that we just thought were unfit Germans, like the mentally ill and the physically disabled and homosexuals, and all of these people are just unfit to be German, and Hitler needed to get rid of them also. Death squads then also rounded up Jews and shot and killed them on the spot, subpoint B. The Jews that weren't killed on the spot were often forced into ghettos. The ghettos were segregated areas of cities, and in particular the ones in Poland, the ones we remember the most. Ghettos were dismal. They were overcrowded neighborhoods. The Nazis sealed off and just like locked in people into the ghettos with barbed wire and stone walls. And then life within the ghettos was awful. As victims died, the bodies were just piled up in the streets, and factories surrounded the towns, and people were forced to go work for German industry along the way. And some Jewish people tried to form resistance movements to go stand up to it. And others maintained Jewish culture through underground newspapers and secret schools and theaters and music groups. And all of it was seditious and dangerous behavior that could have got any of them arrested or killed in a moment's notice. And then subpoint C, the concentration camps were like the next piece. The ghettos were in the cities, but then concentrating people in camps outside of the cities, because a lot of Jewish communities not reached by the death squads were taken to concentration camps or labor camps. And they aren't not immediately death camps. They're immediately just like labor camps where just all the undesirable people are concentrated together in one place and then forced to go work. And families would be divided up and separated forever. They're originally designed as prisons for political opponents and protesters, but they were given over to the stormtroopers to go warehouse people that were considered undesirable. And prisoners were crammed into wooden barracks. They were given very little food. And life was just this ending cycle of hunger and humiliation and work from dawn until dusk, 7 days a week, that ended mercifully in death. Subpoint D, the final solution reached its final stage in 1942. Starvations and beatings and overwork and bullets, they just weren't killing undesirable people fast enough, so the Nazis built a different type of camp, and these become the death camps for just mass murder. Gas chambers were used to kill thousands of people at one time. Upon arrival at one of the death camps, SS doctors separated those who could work until they were dead from the old and the weak who weren't worth keeping alive in the eyes of the Nazis. They were divided up and sent into what were referred to as showers, and then the showers weren't like for cleaning. They would just bring in poison gas and just kill everybody in them. At first, the bodies were buried in pits. Researchers found mass graves, so like modern historians have gone back and found these mass graves of 500 people all lumped in at one time. Later, the bodies gave up on trying to bury them and just cremated them, cremated the bodies to go cover up the evidence. And then, that also dealt with the smell of decaying corpses. Other people died from horrific medical experiments by camp doctors being injected with deadly germs to go discover the effect of diseases. Others were subjected to forced sterilization so Nazis could learn about ways to improve the master race and carry out eugenicist policies. And this is too much to say. Subpoint E. Around 6 million Jews were killed in the camps or massacres. Some escaped, some with the help of ordinary people. Alongside the great tragedy were examples of great heroism along the way. Some of which are known to us. Many of the heroes are unknown to us and known but to the face of God. Whether they escaped or survived in concentration camps, people who lived through the Holocaust, the survivors, were forever changed by their experience. The experience that they lived through is a fascinating study. It's beyond the scope of what I could ever tell you about, but you could certainly make a lifetime's worth of work learning about yourself. God bless you.